Obviously, alcohol licenses are not transferable, but there were, there's some things that can be done. But anyway, the bottom line is we put it in there. Doesn't mean that everybody does it right. That it means we've got something to hold them to if they don't do it right. And again, I don't want it to be misconstrued. We have listened when I spoke years ago to Viviana Jordan. She lived in Florida, but she was over the Southeast region, which is what Ms. Brown is now. And she used to work in local government. And several of the people in their public policy, they've worked in local government. She said, I understand what y'all are dealing with. She went to city council, county commission meetings, all over Florida, different places when they're, debating these ordinances. And she had seen some cities do like really harsh regulations and they fail. They can't get compliance, they can't get enforcement. I've seen some that they did, a lesser regulation and it brought everybody out and people responded to it. What we've seen recently, New York enacted a pretty harsh regulation about a year ago, but didn't start enforcing it until September. And they got way less registrations that they thought. They said, I think their regulation was like you had to rent it for 30 days or something like that. So people were just lying that they were renting it for 30 days, but they were only staying a week or whatever. It wound up driving people underground and wound up, causing people, at least the initial stories I've read about it, it was not helpful. And so that's kind of the point we want to get to. We want it to work for everybody. There's obviously, some of the hosts have presented, there are some legitimate, really nuisance type uses that these are put to. We didn't even talk about, things like the World Games and things like that. I've heard, from staff dealing with, the police and fire World Games, that a lot of those people travel with their family. And so they're looking for homes, to stay in. So it's balancing some of those things, but we obviously do want to put in safeguards for the citizens. And again, this draft gets us to the point of discussion, and all the feedback that you get, y'all are the policy makers. You have the final approval on what gets passed, and mayor has the opportunity to veto if he doesn't like it. You got the opportunity to come back and override that veto. So that's how the legislative process works. But we're at a point that we're having good discussions, getting good feedback, and just look forward to working, through this with all of you.
And my last and final thought, Mr. President, is I heard the president talk about the strain on the police officer out there, Madam Pro Tem, also talk about the enforcement piece, and we've heard the fees that's attached to this in this proposed ordinance. Is how do we get to the point where the fees are, comfortable for people, and to really, put some more resources in if you guys had to bring, more code enforcement people, into the fold. And how often are the code enforcement people going out to these properties, making sure that people, are complying, and not waking up on the news and seeing that somebody had a wild party and, some mother is burying their 21-year-old or their 18-year-old child. And then also, again, community vigilant on if you see 12 cars driving up, you need to be calling somebody. Right. And so please make that very clear when we do come to a point of agreement that the community has a place that they have to play in this. Right. And also, I heard about the parking. I know Ms. Brown was telling me about this Airbnb in our neighborhood, and the young lady leased it to some people that were coming here to some type of auto show. And so when I saw these pictures, I was taken aback because all these guys drove in with these 9-car car haulers. So 24th Street North, you can't park a car hauler on 24th Street North.
No.
You certainly couldn't have drove it up in that alley because you would have tore everything in the alley up. But they went over on a lot that was private and parked those car haulers. And so these owners and people that own these houses gotta know that you got to comply. When this ordinance comes down, you got to comply. That was the reason I was saying, if they get these complaints, will the revocation be ran through the Public Safety Committee? Because we're not gonna hesitate to tell you to shut it down.
Yeah, and again, which committee it goes through is a, decision for the council to make. That's if this is something that, or if we want to run an issue that's with a zoning issue through Planning and Zoning Commission, committee, but the other complaints that are, those kinds of things, run it through public safety. Again, that's up for the council, to make that determination as to which committee things go to. I will say, you mentioned there was like a commercial car hauler. I mean, there is an ordinance that prohibits
Absolutely.
parking. You and I have dealt with a number of 18-wheelers parking, and zoning also prohibits parking commercial vehicles in residential areas. So those are things that people, you're right, we need to educate the public. And one thing that we discussed, and that's I believe Mr. Young spoke last night, and I think he's the one that mentioned it, was one of the things that came out at the Crossplex was discussing that having some education, and I think a number of the hosts who are the ones that I've said have given us some of the ideas that we've tried to incorporate in the draft, would be willing to talk about doing some kind of education for people who are going to host Airbnbs and give them some best practices. Yeah. Because we've had several. I think one said last night, they give people their phone number and tell, those are good hosts. They go to the neighbors, they say, this is what I'm doing at this house. Here's my card. If you have any problems, call me. And some of them have said, they go right over there and they've kicked the people out themselves. A number of them have told us they have cameras, so they see how many people are driving up. They have policies that, in those host policies I was talking about, that say, if your name isn't on the rental, you can't be here. So if 4 people come in and say, have rented, you have to tell them these are the 4 people who will be there, and they show up and 8 more people are there and their names aren't there, they'll say, they have to leave or everybody has to leave. So there are some education pieces that can be done.
And I know it may be, far-fetched. I mean, how many complaints does one have to get before they're considered? Have you guys thought about that for a revocation? Like how many complaints?
Yeah,
is
it's
it
actually
3? Is it 5?
Yeah.
Or?
So first complaint, they get a warning. Second complaint, they, I don't know, you guys can explain, but that's definitely in this draft.
Okay. I mean, I read it and I forgot. I'm like, and also, again, in the educational piece, like if a house is near, in a residential, and just telling the neighbors, if you see, if you don't see an adult, like a parent, like a man or a woman, or, like somebody that's of age, and you start seeing all these teenagers start flooding into this house, please call, yes.
Right.
Because that has been the issue, with a lot of the houses being party houses. I know I've heard some stuff just here recently about a particular one in my area that it was prom, and all of a sudden you just seen everybody like scattering, and I heard some stuff. I was like, oh my God, too much for my ears. But I just want to make sure that when we come to an agreement, that the community and the residents that these homes are in, like you said, Julie, making sure the host, if you can share your number and people start seeing things that's out of the norm, call so we can shut it down.
And for having that local agent and having that information, I think one of the hosts we talked to even suggested, you have to post business licenses and everything. post that number, inside the door, so that, who they can contact if there's an issue.
Thank you.
I'm going to go to Counselor Abbott next, but, so, I see Pro Tem Alexander holding their purse.
Yeah. Yeah, and Ms.
So-
Pearl has a hard stop too.
Is it safe to say that, the draft that we've been provided with, there's been a lot of feedback provided over the last 24 hours. I feel like, this draft that we have currently is likely to see some significant tweaks.
Correct.
Okay, so, taking that into consideration, I think it's a little premature, in my opinion, for this committee to, vote a recommendation at this time. Okay, so if we lose our quorum, that's okay, because we don't have to vote on anything, all right? Counselor Abbott.
Yeah, I had several questions, but I'll try to talk fast. Okay, the definitions section is entirely insufficient. We need a definition of everything. What's a bedroom? Is it a room you put a bunch of beds in? If I clear out the basement and fill it full of beds, are those bedrooms?
I'm sure that's defined somewhere in like the building codes and things like that.
Well, yeah,
We'll
but
look to that.
it needs to be in this
Yep.
ordinance, because some people will only read this ordinance and say, okay, I can fulfill this. You have a section that says, there will be, cooking facilities are not permitted in any bedroom. And then following that are several sentences that say that you can have cooking facilities. So, maybe we could fix that to where there really are no cooking facilities in a bedroom. Like, no means no. Is
Yeah.
anybody going to check the wiring in these houses to find out if they can accommodate any of the weird stuff that people plug in? Because if your house was built in 1908, you have knob and tubing wiring. Is anybody going to check to see whether these places are safe for the transients who are going to rent the rooms in them? Anybody?
Well, we've had discussions. Our fire marshal, our fire inspections do not inspect single-family structures.
Maybe they shouldn't be used as short-term rentals, since they're single-family structures.
But that's the
It's
answer
a
to your
thought.
question about who inspects. So,
Yeah, well,
But,
if
and-
we have house fires, it's gonna be on us, because we didn't do anything. But we let these things turn from single-family residences or residences at all. We let them turn into a hotel without any inspections. So when they catch on fire and burn a bunch of people up, including the houses on either side, because they're only 10 feet away, then it's gonna be on the city of Birmingham. I would think it would be just a fabulous lawsuit. It could go all the way to the Supreme Court and they'd just do whatever they want. So I think it's something we need to think about, because if you don't live in an ancient home, you don't know all the things that can go wrong that can kill people. So to me, that's important. I think we need definitions of a bedroom. What is a resident, since that's in question? Short-term rental owner, what is that? Is that a person who rents a house out to someone else who turns it into a short-term rental and the owner doesn't even know it? Because I've heard of that happening. I rent the house and then I turn it into a short-term rental. And the owner, I just send him a rent check every month. And he's happy. So we need to address that. These houses are being turned into, the people buy an old derelict house and they turn it into a short-term rental. Does anybody check to see if they got a building permit?
We have, when we've gotten complaints, I know there have been complaints, and those issues have been addressed.
Okay, but when they come down to apply for their license for this brand-new short-term rental they've just renovated, does anyone check to see, hey, did these people have a building permit in order to create the short-term rental that they're now requesting a permit for?
That can be part of the checklist of what we look at.
I mean, because in my district, I would be surprised if half of the renovations have a building permit. By law, you are supposed to post it, that you've got a permit. You rarely ever see anything posted. And when council members turn them in, you still don't see anything posted, which makes me think no one looked. So you've got people out there doing illegal work, sometimes shoddy illegal work. And when you cover up shoddy illegal work with really nice looking sheetrock and a coat of paint, nobody knows what's inside. Until the next
I do
big,
know a lot of people don't post their permits because they get stolen.
the permits get stolen, why don't they put them inside the house?
They still get stolen. We've heard that a lot at the permit counter.
Well, you know, I turn in a lot of places because I see people doing jackleg work at night and on the weekends. And I tell you, it's a pandemic of people cheating because they know they can get by with it because it's Birmingham.
I do know of cases where they have addressed, you know, we talked about the double fee. If they've done something without a permit, that's, you know, they'll make them come in and they have to pay a double fee, to get a permit, and we can require them to open back up the work. We've discussed that in adopting the technical codes, and from talking to staff, that does happen. I'm aware of cases. I'm aware of a case a few years ago where somebody forged a building permit. Our inspector was in the field inspecting permitted work and saw some work going on, and they stopped to see what was going on. And there was a permit posted, and they started talking to the people, but when they called back to the office, there was no permit for that site. And when we looked at the permit, it looked pretty good, probably at a distance, like one of our permits. But when you looked at it, ordinances that were referenced were not ours. They didn't, you know, connect with they were forged. And people need to understand, this is something we have pursued in some issues with building permits. There is a state law on second-degree forgery that includes forging government documents or providing false information on government documents that are filed with government employees. And you give the false information to defraud. It tells you something that we've seen a lot of is people who undervalue the work because they're not licensed builders. And if it's under $10,000, they don't have to be a licensed builder, so that, you know, may not, you know, that doesn't get the elevated scrutiny. And then we find out later, because the homeowner files a complaint at some point, that the work was really $100,000 or something. And we have pursued some of those, you know, when we find them, we're trying to pursue those as felony cases. So, I mean, I'm just saying that and I did include in the technical code revision this time that y'all adopted just a few weeks ago, you know, we can't make something a felony, but we included a statement in there related to the application that if you lie about it, there is this state law that's a felony. So I'm trying to put people on notice, don't lie, and don't forge your building permits, and don't forge your documents. So, but that, I mean, you're right, Councilor Abbott, there are people that are out there that are, you know, doing everything they can to not do what they're supposed to do. And I am aware, I know it's frustrating, but I am aware that staff does catch things. We may not catch 100%, but they do.
Better.
But it's got, yeah, there's a lot of attention being paid to it, and as we break through some of the bottlenecks, you know, I only hope that it gets better.
Yeah, well, we need more. The noise measurement devices that some of the landlords, the hosts talked about last night, we need that to be a requirement because, you know, that's a big issue.
Yeah.
But I'll just write up all my other stuff because I know
do that.
people want to leave and
Yeah.
I sympathize.
Yeah, but we agree, yes, several of them have told us, that they have cameras, and several of them have told us they have the noise meters, and they recommend that as a best practice. We just missed adding that in, so that we'll add that in.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. I think we're ready to, any new or old business? All right. Motion to adjourn? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.